Good morning, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of our AM and PM committee to have our budget presentation. So I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
I'll do that quickly. I'll note that Councillors Arnold, Councillor Bradley, and Councillor Broad are not here, but we otherwise have a quorum.
Thank you. So the only order of business today is to have a presentation from our treasurer, Mr. Innes, to deal with the budget binders that we will receive following the presentation. And I know that staff has worked very hard to bring in a budget that is very good budget, very good place to start. So we will have that presentation, and thank staff for the hard work that they put forth, and I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the introduction of the 2019 draft budget. As the Warden has said, your staff have been working hard on this over the past 4 to 5 months. And when we built this document, we needed to take into account the fact that population projections for Lambton County continue to remain flat. Although the economy has generally been performing strong and showing levels of employment or improvement, and local employment levels have been stable, all good signs for us. Despite that, Lambton does have limited assessment growth, but last year we had no significant write-downs or write-offs, which was good as well, which means there's stability within the assessment base that we have. Interest rates have also not risen as much as we would have thought they would have at the beginning of last year. That has provided some savings for us, but we're still seeing and expect that they are going to increase as time goes on. Other positive notes to take into account, SWIFT has left its first contract to start building the backbone for the network that is going to provide high-speed internet across southwest Ontario. They let that contract at the end of last year, and we expect that we'll begin to see some impact from that going forward in the latter half of this year and into 2020. On a more cautious note, we know that the provincial government has indicated it wants to trim $15 billion from its annual spending, and how that will impact on municipalities right now is unclear. Also, we're noting that there are significantly less funding opportunities available to the county any of the application-driven funding programs from either the province or the federal governments. Finally, your staff follow a strict discipline on spending. Our policy has always been, if you don't need to spend it, do not spend it. If there is a legitimate reason for a cost to be incurred, we will find a way to come up with the funds to make that possible. We've also had a milder than anticipated autumn, and we had higher than expected PIL payments and lower tax write-offs, which meant that the county was blessed to be able to end 2018 with a surplus. Again, you've seen that report in your agenda packages for the committee meetings today. Regardless of it, it means that when we built the budget, we had to try and balance the needs of the community against the need to be cautious, because we really don't know what's going to happen with the funding that we receive from the province, which is a significant portion of the county's budget. Mentioned property assessment. We're in the third year of the current assessment cycle in 2019. We had hoped that we were going to see some reforms on policies with regards to valuation practices. The current government has indicated that it's not interested in changing things. It's looked very much at keeping things in the status quo. That means that as far as landfills are concerned, that the interim solution that was introduced at the beginning of this assessment cycle continues to be what we have to follow and what we're going to deal with going forward. We do, however, have to be careful and watch what's happening with pipelines. That affects Dawn Euphemia and some of the other municipalities in the area. The industry is questioning what should be classed as infrastructure and what should be classed as equipment, all of which could have a potential significant impact on assessment in the area. We also, MPAC's new president also made some changes in its organization last month. Carla Nell, who many of you knew and know, was their vice president in charge of client relations for municipalities. They've eliminated that position and have made it a director instead. So what that means to us as municipalities and our relationship with MPAC also is unknown at this point in time. Regardless, we continue to work on proactive appeals, making sure that we're complying with the new ARB rules, and we will continue to use outside sources to help you and your staff anytime there are high-impact appeals in the area. Weighted assessment has increased by 4.32% this year. That's down slightly from last year, but the critical figure that everybody needs to take into account is what the real growth was for 2019. By real growth, we mean assessment that is new to the role that was not there in the previous year. Therefore, we can take that assessment and take some funding from that without impacting the general rate of taxation on everybody else. The amount of funding that's available from that source for 2019 is almost $750,000. Tax policy. Tax policy is one of the major responsibilities that you as County Council have, and the decisions that you make here on tax policy impact how you are able to tax in your own lower tier jurisdictions. Last year, we had a couple of challenges and very complex issues that County Council dealt with. They made some decisions on that. The most important ones were the fact that they reduced the multi-residential class ratio down to the point to eliminate the hard cap that the province had imposed. But they also felt that there was a strong need to provide a break to the farm community, and therefore they reduced the farm ratio to 0.23 from 0.25%. We did not make any changes last year with regards to vacancy rebates. That is something that we are going to bring back to discuss with Council again this year during the tax policy reviews. But we're also going to make sure that we do this from time to time, that we're going to give you a comparison of how our ratios in Lambton County compare to our neighbors so that everybody is aware of the jurisdiction that we are providing to our ratepayers here and how it compares competitively to other places to do business in and around Southwest Ontario. Debt level. The county does borrow, but we believe that we borrow judiciously. And as you will see at the top of this slide, the outstanding amount of debt that we have is reducing year over year. We are planning to borrow again in 2019. The budget includes a little over $2.5 million in new debt that we're proposing to fund 5 projects. But even with this $2.5 million that we're talking about, the overall trend on the amount of debt that is outstanding continues to be dropping year over year. So we are trying to make sure that we use debt when it makes sense to use it in order to allow us to compete projects that otherwise could not be competed in a timely manner. But at the same time, we're always trying to make sure that we are not using it indiscriminately and mortgaging the future. And we believe that we've continued to do that and show the fact that through the numbers that we're presenting here and by the fact that our outside assessment agencies continue to rate us as AA minus stable, as indicating the fact that we're on the right track. We've never had any of these external appraising organizations say to us that we borrow too much. If anything, they've said to us that we don't borrow enough and that we should be saving more. But that's a story for another day. Key cost components in the budget for 2019. I'm not going to run through all the numbers here. The critical number I'm going to draw your attention to is the number on the bottom, the 4.363. That represents costs that came about because of decisions the council made in 2018 or because of changes in policy from the province that impacted on our ability to do various things and fund various costs. So when we started the budget for this year, we knew that we were facing almost a $4.4 million increase in funding required. Doesn't mean that that all had to be funded from the tax base. We also identified and were able to come up with $1.2 million in new revenues, which meant that the net impact on the budget from these costs was a little over $3 million. I also provide you with a breakdown of the three types of reserves that we are told that we are to build into the beginning of the budget each year. The county has, for approximately the last, I think, almost 30 years, put 1% of the prior year's levy away each year into split 50-50 between an operating and a capital reserve. We also put 2% each year into the opportunities and contingencies reserve. That is a number that is built into the budget. You as council, when you are debating what you are going to do going forward, can make a change on that, but the instructions have always been for us to put these numbers into the budget when we present it to you. We also include $4 million into the programmed funding of the amortization of existing TCAs. And this is a program that was started 8 years ago and has been extremely successful in allowing the county to ensure that we can replace assets when they are used up and need to be either bettered or new assets purchased in their stead. Regardless, it has helped us ensure that stabilize the funding deficit that we do have with regards to TCAs, to the point that where we are now able to say that for the most part, we're almost to the point of being able to have sufficient funding built into the budget to allow us to maintain our existing asset stock without having it to have a significant impact year over year on the budget. Other influences on the budget for this year. At the front of your binder book, when you receive it, you're going to find there are going to be 4 reports. 3 of these you have seen before. 1 of them is new. The first one is impacts and influences on the county's draft 2019 budget. It's going to take what's been in this slide and the previous 2 and expand upon that a bit more to give you more background information on that. There is also the CAO's attrition management update. Again, council several years ago asked that once a year the CAO provide a report letting you know all of the positions that have been eliminated through attrition and what the impact has been on the county's FTE count. We also are providing you with the social services trend report. Again, this is a large document that is put together by our social services staff, and the idea behind it is it lets you know what is happening in the labor market and on the demands for the services of that department in and around Lambton County. The 4th report is a new one this year. We're calling it a summary of known future needs. And what this does is this identifies spending that staff have been able to note during their planning exercises for the budget that are not included in the current budget but are going to need to be incurred and the money spent within the next 5 to 7 years. Again, the idea behind this is we're presenting you with a budget now that tells you what the needs are for this year, but we want you to also be aware of the fact of what's coming in the future so that you can put that into context. Second point that I wanted to make here is the fact that the county receives a lot of funding from the province, more so than most of your area municipalities do. In fact, approximately 2/3 of the county's budget comes from funding through various programs from the provincial government. We like to take a look at that and determine what the impact on the overall funding makeup of the county is. And what we're saying here is the fact that when we look at the amount of provincial funding and the portion of the overall budget that comprises, we're kind of seeing a trend over the last several years where the amount of funding from the province has been decreasing and the amount of funding that has to come from the local tax base has been increasing. The impact this year, and again, this is a very broad analysis, just to indicate a trend, is that we needed an extra $130,000 in funding from the tax base compared to what we did last year. So if we'd received the same proportionate funding last year, this year, we would have been able to reduce the funding from the tax base by that $130,000. Talked about some programs that we have in place. The $4 million to reserves is for the funding of the TCA, and it's designed to help us eliminate and fund our infrastructure deficit. The previous council also moved to implement a 10-year, $40 million plan to help us rejuvenate and update our social housing stock. Both of these programs have been extremely successful and are allowing us to do far more than we would have been able to do if they had not been put in place. And although we are beginning to make significant progress on the backlog of the TCA infrastructure deficit, we will be presenting more reports to council during this year because there's more we can do. If we look at the asset management report, and we presented this to you previously, it suggests that we should be spending about $29 million a year on the replacing of existing assets. We currently spend about 20. So we know we can do more, and what we're going to do is we're going to present you some additional ideas in reports this year that can help you potentially close that gap even further than where it is. The other significant point, and I've talked about this a couple of other times already, is the fact that we do not know what is going to happen with cost share programs. The province seems to be indicating that it's going to be largely status quo for the 2019 calendar year, but we also know that their new financial year starts on April 1st. There's going to be a new budget. What is that going to mean for the funding going forward? Regardless, we've had to build the budget based on the best information that we have. We have some assurances that suggest to us that we don't have to worry about the funding for this current year, but we don't have anything to put that in black and white. It's only been assurances at this point in time. We've built the budget based on those numbers that we have. We hope that they're going to come forward. We have no reason to indicate that they're not, but we also have no guarantee they're going to be there. So we can't stress the fact that the budget is based on the best information we have available at this point in time, but be prepared for the fact that it may change throughout the year as time goes on and the province decides what it's going to do with regards to that $15 billion. For the people that are new to council, when you look at your budget book, you're going to find that under each department, you're going to see what is referred to as a departmental budget overview. This is a document that provides you with a lot of information regarding that department, starting with what its responsibilities are, how many FTEs there are employed in that department. We have an impact sections that looks at what they are asking for as an increase or a decrease in funding from the tax base in 2019 compared to 2018, and what would happen if that funding was not provided, both from the standpoint of the department and potentially on the county as a whole. We provide you with a summary of changes and the reasons why those changes have occurred as well. In other words, when we are taking a look at the numbers, if a number has changed, we will explain to you what has happened, why the number is up or down, and again, as we said, what the impact is going to be on the overall ability of the department to deliver its services and its mandate. We also show amortization expense. That is a non-cash item. The accountants in the room will appreciate what that means. It does not impact on the tax levy or the portion of levy that is needed to fund the program, but again, it is a representative number of how many assets, in other words, how many of those TCAs that we have a deficit on that we need to try and fund the replacement of are impacted and are needed by that department to deliver its services. And finally, perhaps one of the more important pieces of information, we also give you the name and the contact information of the manager responsible for that department or program in the bottom of the sheet. The idea behind it is if you have questions, please call them. They will be more than willing to answer the questions that you do have. So what does the budget for 2019 say? Putting it in overall terms, we are looking at an increase in funding of $3.3 million. And again, I would draw your attention back to, if you remember the slide in which I showed you the known expenditures coming in and what the offset revenues were, that was roughly $3.1 million. So we know that most of the impact that we have in the budget is based on those numbers that are in that report. And if you take into account the $130,000 in additional funding that we've had to pick up this year because of reductions in provincial funding, that means that all but about $60,000 of that number can be explained by those two factors. That accounts for a 1.55% increase in spending. To put that into context, inflation at the end of 2018 was 1.99%. So we're keeping the overall spending well below the rate of inflation for 2019 going forward. The amount of taxation that we need to, and again, this is largely dependent on the changes in the mix of funding that we get, the gross number is 2.59% increase in taxation. But that does not mean that that's where we end up with regards to the impact on taxes, because we do have new assessment that is new to the role that allows us to increase the funding that we have. And what that does is that reduces the impact on taxation for 2019, so that when we look at the actual amount of funding that is available in or it's required for 2019 budget, we're talking about a net impact of 1.75%. So in other words, the increase in taxation from existing tax sources or existing assessment is a 1.75% impact compared to the 1.99% inflation. When we take a look at things, you'll find that, go a bit of history and context here, at the end of 2018, our tax rates were 11.5% lower than they were at the end of the term of council in 2006. The tax rates in 2018, if the budget remains the way it is right now, will drop even further. So that increase will, or that decrease will increase again. To put in perspective what this means, it means that if we had been using the tax rates from 2006 last year, we have actually raised close to $10 million more than what we did. Now, this is not to suggest that we should have been raising the $10 million more than we did, but what we're trying to put here and make sure that you understand is that we do not set the budget based on what the maximum capability of the county, the tax is. We base the budget on what the needs are, and we try and make sure that the rate or the impact on taxation is kept as low as it possibly can be. We also try and make sure that we are going to maximize the ability to use funding from OSIF and the federal gas tax. But, and this is a critical thing to note as well, we do not include in here the potential costs from awarding a council grant or for any matter that was referred to council. And again, that's by edict of previous council. Council grants for this year, we've only received one application, and again, you received a presentation from that party at your last council meeting. That is from the Children's Safety Village. It's an interesting presentation this year. It was referred to council, but it's also a grant, so where do we debate that? We decided we'd do it under referred to council in the budget book, but it also will potentially, once it's approved, end up under council grants. Regardless, what they are asking for is a $50,000 per year over a 5-year grant. And if you are going to award that in your deliberations, that will require you to increase the funding from the tax base by $50,000 in the absence of any other changes. And again, as I said, this is just a redundant slide for this year, that the fact that the Children's Safety Village was already referred to budget. On the March 6th budget meeting, there will be no regular business conducted. The only thing that will be on the agenda for that day will be matters relating to the 2019 budget. We will be seeking your decision with regards to the grant application from the Children's Safety Village. We will then go through and do a full review of the departmental budgets. You do not receive presentations from managers, but managers and GMs will be in chambers and available to answer any questions that you may have with regards to the budget. I also must let you know that budget review is by exception. In other words, the only time that a motion is needed is when you want to change something. If you don't want to change something, you can, at the end of the debate, end up with a single motion to approve the budget as presented, and that's all that we require. It's only happened once, but it has happened before. We will also provide on the agenda the bylaw to approve the budget so that you can complete the process on March the 6th if you are satisfied with the number that you have. If not, as I've indicated at the top of the slide, there's a second day that's available to deal with the budget matters should we need that. And again, I think it's only happened twice in the last 18 years. This slide, I'm not going to go through this one. This is in your folder, and you can look at that and a bit more when you have your leisure. This is just to try and make sure that you're aware of other key dates that impact on the budget and the follow-up of the budget to actual reviews the council do, or staff do for you as council. So in summary, we know we have new tax revenues available that are not going to impact on 2019 tax levels. Right now, the net additional funding required is results in a net increase of 1.75% compared to the rate of inflation at the end of December, which is 1.99, and has been trending upwards since then. We know that the level of proportionate funding from the province in the budget has dropped for this year again, but we also know that our tax rates are lower now than they were in 2006 and will drop even lower again in 2019 compared to 2018. We are not taxing to the maximum capability of the tax base. We are taxing to what is needed in order to maintain the programs and keep the budget as realistic as we possibly can. The contributions to reserves and the program funding to amortization are included on the basis that we have been directed by council. And as I've indicated on several other cases, existing mandated service levels are being maintained. So with that, Mr. Warden, that's the end of the presentation for today. And we do have binders which we will hand out to council at the end of the meeting. Otherwise, we are available to answer questions of clarification if needed.
Okay, again, thank you for that presentation. Questions for clarification? Councillor Stark.
Yes, Mr. Ennis. On the OSIF funding, I know in our municipality we forecasted a 20% decrease. When the memo came through from the treasurer, that in effect created a surplus in the short term, albeit with the warning that it could in fact change greatly in years flowing out. My question is, on your budget projections, where did you see the OSIF funding coming in?
Thank you, Councillor Stark. We debated that to a large extent because, again, the messaging, especially before Christmas coming from the province, was somewhat mixed with regards to this. We did receive indications, a strong indication that for 2019 that the funding would be at the level that had been previously communicated to us. So we did not reduce the amount that we included in the budget arbitrarily. We decided that we would put it in based on the written commitment that we had previously received from the province. So the risk here is that they don't follow through with that commitment. We have no indication to suggest that they will not at this point in time, but there is no, how would we put it, unused money left on the table with regards to that grant.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the process, I think, is what we're looking for. Everyone understands that we come back on the 6th with questions. It was quite clear, and I would invite everyone that has questions through the binder to contact the departments and the managers that are responsible and have those clarifications and questions prior to March 6th that can be asked again at March 6th in the public forum, but get that information. Staff is only, they're very willing to share with clarification and how they come up with the numbers. And I again, if there are no further questions, again, I commend staff for bringing a budget in that is reasonable and probably could be passed today if we wanted to, but I think we need to go through the process. And if there's nothing else, Councillor Marriott, question.
Thank you, Warden Weaver. Just clarification, Mr. Ennis, on the 1.75, so that is dollars over 18?
That's correct. So that's 1.75 net increase in the funding amount required. What the actual impact will be on ratepayers, it's going to depend on all those other moving parts that we have that we've talked about in tax policy discussions.
Thank you. I realize that it's before the things that we were referred to budgets, so, okay, thank you.
Okay. Motion to adjourn. I believe there will be lunch served, and the committee meeting will meet back here for lunch. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Napper and Councillor Loosley. All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you. Come gather your binders.